Excellencies, dear colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to who is with us on WebEx and to who is now joining us on Facebook Live. The Geneva Environment Network has the pleasure to welcome you today virtually for the fourth session of the Geneva Beat Plastic Pollution Dialogues, organized in collaboration with the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Convention Secretariat, the Center for International Environmental Law, the Global Governance Center at the Graduate Institute, and the governments of Norway and of Switzerland. For those who wouldn't yet know our platform, we are a network of more than 100 institutions and secretariats based in Geneva that make this region one of the global hubs for environmental governance. Administrated by the United Nations Environment Programme and supported by Switzerland, we organize various networking activities, including regular multi-stakeholder roundtables and briefings on major environmental trends. The Geneva Beat Plastic Pollution Dialogues aim at linking different plastic issues to the governance question and encourage increased engagement in the run-up to various global environmental negotiations that will take place this year and next year. We want to understand how we are using specific global instruments to address the plastics crisis or how we could use them better. The first session focused on plastics and waste and brought some recommendations on the need to reinforce, adapt, and coordinate existing instruments, move forward on a global agreement, harmonize and optimize standards and guidelines, support science, coordinate national measures to foster circular economy, as well as capacity building and technology transfers. The second session focused on climate and air pollution, and some of the outcomes included the need to end the production and use of single-use disposable plastic, stop the development of new oil, gas, and petrochemical infrastructure, reinvent industries to foster circular economy and recyclability, foster the transition to zero-waste communities, support research on plastics, and foster science-informed policy, develop design and labeling standards, maintain political momentum on the global level for international action. And last week, we hosted the third session and we were discussing human rights. The session concluded that a rights-based approach to the plastics life cycle can help prevent and redress human rights infringements. Steps in that direction include integrate human rights and environmental justice concerns into instruments and actions that address plastic-related issues. Foster participation and involve communities and vulnerable groups. Develop and enforce monitoring, reporting, and diffuse information, foster accountability through extended producer responsibility, overcome linear thinking in product design and promote circularity, ensure liability and mechanisms of compensation for harm, and also the support to a global legally binding agreement that addresses the entire plastics life cycle. You will find all this information and the video of these events on our website. And of course, some of the sessions came with similar recommendations. The fourth session that we are hosting today will focus on health. Before I give the floor to today's moderator, who will guide you through this session, let me briefly introduce you to our panel. In Geneva, we have with us Maria Nera, the Director of the Department of Environment, Climate Change and Health of the World Health Organization. We deeply appreciate to have you, Maria Nera, with us today, as it is a busy time for the World Health Organization. Also in Geneva, Monica McDevitt, the Chief of the Chemicals and Health Branch of the United Nations Environment Programme. From the Permanent Mission of Uruguay, we have with us Valentina Sierra, who is the environmental focal point, and she's also, Valentina, the Vice President of ICCM5, I'm using here an acronym, a major conference on the sound management of chemicals beyond 2020 that should take place in the second semester of this year. In Australia, we have with us Tava Palanisamy, who is a Senior Research Fellow at the School of Engineering of the University of Newcastle. These days in Sweden, we have with us Sarah Brochet, Science Advisor at IPEN, a global network working on strengthening global and national chemicals and waste policies. And also with us in Geneva, Paul Rose, a National Geographic expedition leader and explorer, an excellent communicator, as you will hear in this session. And finally, today's session moderator is Miguel Perez Laplante, the health counselor of the permanent mission of Switzerland to the United Nations and other international organizations in Geneva. Let me also remind you that the video of this event and the presentations made, as well as a summary, will be available online on the webpage of this event. You can raise your questions in the Q&A box throughout the event, and we will address them in the last part of this session. Miguel, over to you.
So welcome everyone, Excellency, colleagues, participants to this fourth Geneva Beat Plastic Pollution Dialogues. And shall I say welcome to my living room, because I wasn't able to change the background as others. In COVID times, that's the reality right now. I mean, this is a joint initiative, as mentioned by Diana, by Switzerland, by Norway, by the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Convention Secretariat, by the Center for International Environmental Law, by the Global Governance Center, by the Graded Institute, and it really highlights how plastic pollution is really a multi-stakeholder issue. And today we have a multi-stakeholder panel, as has been mentioned by Diana before. We have WHO, we have UNEP, we have member states with the permanent mission of Uruguay, we have academia, we have civil society, and we have even a National Geographic Explorer. So this will be a very exciting event to tackle the issue of health and health pollution. So I'm as mentioned, the health counselor of the Swiss mission. So I'm generally in the health world and not in the environmental world. So maybe the intruder here. So you may ask, why me? Maybe the first answer is that I really want to find out today what I can do about eating the equivalent of a credit card every week. I hope everybody had a good lunch, but it's a big issue, and it has surely effects on health, and I want to find more about it. The second is, as you see at the picture, International Geneva. International Geneva is a capital of many things, capital of trade, people call it capital of trade, capital of human rights. But it is also called the capital of global health, health being on top of the global agenda right now, and also the capital of governance of chemicals and waste. And it is in a unique position if the expertise comes together to advance the plastic pollution agenda. Now I picked this image in the background because that's a project I was involved with Maria Neira, initiated by WHO. It really highlights what can be done in Geneva. There was a conference on air pollution involving WMO and UNEP. It was a collective effort to tackle the question of air pollution, how the health community can do something about it. So these are pollution pods where you can experience where leaders, political leaders, and person from international organization, NGO can experience actually the polluted air in different cities. It also highlights how much more information we have right now on the health effects of air pollution, how little we have on the health effect of plastic pollution. And it highlights maybe a way forward, and that in Geneva we can do more about it. So we want to stimulate the community here in Geneva, and all stakeholders have a role to play to get involved in the three big negotiations that will happen this year. As we mentioned before, the 5th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly, the meetings of the Conference of the Parties to the Basel, Rotterdam, Stockholm Convention, and the 5th session of the International Conference for Chemicals Management. So this being said, I just want to introduce the discussion today, which will be structured in three parts. We will first have a welcome and an introduction, and as a first speaker, Dr. Maria Neira, who's leading the environmental effort with WHO. Then we'll have introductory remark by Mrs. Monica McDevitt, who's leading the chemicals and health branch at UNEP. And then we'll have a second part, which will be more about setting the scene, learning about the latest science on plastic and health. And we'll have Mr. Tava Palanizami, representing the academic world with the University of Newcastle. Then Sarah Broche for IPEN, representing the civil society. And finally, Paul Rose, representing the world of exploration and maybe journalism. And then we'll have a third part where we'll discuss what we can do about it and what governance is necessary, how health governance can play a role. And here we have the distinguished representative of the Permanent of Uruguay, Mrs. Valentina Serra, and then we'll open the discussion with inputs of WHO, UNEP. And you will be also, you participant will be also able to participate. So we ask you to please enter your question on the chat box. And we have the Geneva Environmental Network colleague, Malu, who will put the questions together and will ask the question back to the panel. Please, if possible, if you want, indicate to whom you want to ask the questions. I will be, as the panelists already know, I will try to be very strict on the time because we want to have a very productive discussion. The session will end at 3:15. So we will try to really use this time as time efficient as possible. So this being said, before starting the panel, if you allow me, I would just want to ask, because I'm coming from the health work, just a small introductory kickoff questions. If the panelists can just say a few words in the beginning. I mean, we are in the middle of a pandemic, a global pandemic. I mean, do you think, what's the impact of this pandemic on plastic pollution? I mean, you understand this mask contains some plastics, but at the same time, there's a whole discussion about Build Back Better. Do you think this is good or bad for the plastic governance, plastic pollution governance agenda? So this being said, I will give first the floor to our first introductory speaker, Dr. Maria Naira from WHO. You have the floor. Are you ready?
Thank you. Yes, Miguel, thank you. I'm very happy to be with you, and certainly happy to see a lot of old friends that I now don't see anymore. So at least to see you on a screen is very satisfying. And thanks for this opportunity, and thanks for reminding us that Geneva is such an incredible international place where you can have such an incredible impact as well. And the fact that you choose to demonstrate that the pollution pods, it makes me very happy, because I remember very well how you help us when we propose you this crazy idea, because it was a crazy idea to create this kind of tents. The colleagues in UNEP knows this project extremely well, but for others, where we recreated the pollution exposure in different cities around the world, and the mayor of Geneva was looking at us like, what? And then Miguel was absolutely fantastic in helping us to sell this project, and at the end, it was really a very visible one with an incredible impact. So, Miguel, everybody's talking about COVID-19, so we'll be responsible not to mention at least something. COVID-19 told us that we are very vulnerable, and one of the vulnerabilities comes exactly because we are not handling well our relationship with the environment. And this is probably one of the biggest lessons that we are all learning with a horrible price. WHO did in May, and in our Department on Environmental Health, we propose a manifesto with 6 prescriptions about how to go for a healthy and green recovery after COVID-19. I don't want to build back better. I don't think we should go back. Back was wrong. We need to build forward better. And I think one of the best ways to build forward better will be to stop pollution, no matter what this pollution is coming from. Our first prescription under the manifesto for this healthy and green recovery is exactly that. Make sure that we recover, we reestablish relationship with nature, as nature is the one providing us the water we drink, the food we eat, and the air we breathe. So let's stop this destruction of our environment. Let's stop this pollution of the air we breathe, pollution of the water, the oceans, with all of this plastic and pollution of our life. I feel horrible when I see now, because we are closing all the restaurants and we have this takeaway, all of this incredible amount of plastic that might end up again polluting all our environment, and all the masks ending us as well in heavy ways of pollution. So I think we focus on this stop pollution, including the plastic pollution. WHO has concerns about the macroplastics and the microplastics. And I'm sure that we will have opportunity to discuss about the reports, but we will be using our health voice to make sure that we will reduce as much as possible the plastic pollution, recognizing that plastic still have some definitely good use in certain medical devices and others, but in many other occasions it's not needed, and therefore it has to be reduced no matter what we know at the moment in terms of how it's affecting our health. Nobody wants to eat fish that is full of plastic, and nobody wants to eat every day or every week the equivalent of a credit card. And I'm sure that those are investments that nobody can disagree with, because what will be the option? Eating plastic? That's certainly not what we want. So stop pollution, use Geneva for even more awareness raising. We will push for this manifesto, particularly this relationship with nature. And one of the key ones is exactly stop pollution, and plastic pollution will go into that perfectly, that prescription that we will be pushing with all our power and influence. Over, and thank you again.
Thank you, Marina Neira. So you mentioned that we have to remake our relationship with the environment and stop polluting. I think that's a very powerful word. I will switch to our second introductory speaker, Mrs. Monica McDevitt. You have the floor.
Thanks very much, Miguel. And now, having been on several panels with Maria over the years, she's always such a hard act to follow, but let me try. And we work in such an overlapping field, but let me just add a few remarks to the fantastic ones that Maria made as well. And I welcome all the distinguished guests and my fellow panelists on this. As we all know, plastics have become a really major source of pollution globally. And while they have become a necessary part of life and our way of life, we need to take a broader and a more holistic approach to their production and management, including through life cycle analysis and a resource circularity understanding. We need to know how this impacts, not just from the end of the pipeline of plastics that we see in the environment and then the health implications of that, but how do we look at it from an entire resource use? Because quite frankly, almost all of the plastics that we use today come from a fossil fuel source. And all along the way, there are concerns around chemicals and health-related issues in the production of that, not just what happens to the plastic after the end of the day. And I think as you, Miguel, and as Maria have rightly pointed out, this COVID pandemic has brought into a very clear view both our reliance on plastics, just in terms of life-saving technology, but as well, what do we do with it? Because it is always a one-use and having to dispose of type of commodity, and a very important one in our own health. So we really do need to look at how we manage really life-saving and really critical, as well as convenient plastic in our life, and take responsibility for it. We also need to make sure that we don't lose sight of the impact of plastics in the environment, and Maria has touched on that. We also need to look at understanding better plastic decomposition and the effect that all of this has on the rest of life on this planet, and how we are affecting it through our own needs and through our own convenience. We've all seen some of these horrific pictures of dead birds with nothing but plastic particles in their stomachs because they've starved to death, picking up little bits of plastic along the shoreline for food. We've also seen the big animals, the whales, and in Kenya, the cattle that have plastic garbage bags in their stomachs. This certainly can't be a good thing. These animals either end up dying or end up passing on some of those toxics into the flesh that we eat through animals that we consume if you're a carnivore. So these are the really important things we have to take into consideration from an environmental perspective, not just our own health and well-being, but also as custodians and stewards of the environment and the rest of life on this planet, where we have to take into consideration that the life on the planet that forms the ecosystems that we depend on for all of the ecosystem services cannot function well if they are also compromised through pollution and plastic pollution in the environment. And as Maria said, looking at nature-based solutions, ecosystem-based solutions, we cannot expect those solutions to function at 100% in a compromised environment. So we have to look at pollutants and plastic in the environment in terms of our own health and well-being. Are the stewards of the rest of life on this planet as well. I'll be talking more about that in my presentation, but I think I'll just leave those comments where they are for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. And as you say, nobody wants to see these pictures of animals again. But at the same time, we're dependent on plastic, including for life-saving technology and health. And as you mentioned, the question is of management of these resources. Thank you very much for your introductory remark. I will have now the pleasure to switch to the second part of this session, and I will be setting the scene to learn about the latest science on plastic and health. And our first speaker is Mr. Tava Palanisamy, this time I'll make it, from the University of Newcastle. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so you have the floor. Thank you.
Yeah, I just need to share the content. Diana, I couldn't share. Yeah. Are you able to see my slides? Mikkel?
We can't see the slides right now.
Okay.
Oh yes,
can you hear me all right?
It's coming now. I think it's working.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Good afternoon and greetings from Australia. So, as Director General explained, we want to solve big problems globally, but often it is hard to understand this problem deeply. So we can fix their permanent root cause instead of surface level symptoms. And for example, COVID-19. All the endemic and epidemics are based on how we treat the environment around us. And it is the best time to discuss the plastic issue because plastic is not just an inert contaminant. It will interact with the environment, including chemicals and pathogens. So, as we all know, plastic waste in the environment is probably here to stay for decades, if not centuries. And we are a team of researchers looking at several aspects of the impacts of plastic pollution. And we wanted to share one of our findings to inspire others to take the action to produce the greatest impact possible in solving this problem. So human exposure to plastics is evident by detection of microplastics in drinking water, food, air, plants, and even human. To what extent the exposure to these plastic particles of varying shape and size and composition are relevant for public health is still unclear. So I'm giving a best possible example within the given short time. One of our piece of evidence is that mass of microplastic ingested by human. So which we think is the pivotal first step towards human health risk assessment. So the ubiquitous presence of microplastics in the food web has been established. However, the mass still is not yet defined. It's because so many limitations and challenges, which is an impeding factor for human health risk assessment. Our objective was in these studies to analyze the mass of microplastic by standardizing the available evidences from various sources, work out the uncertainties, and set the future research directions, and derive global average rate of microplastic ingestion to assist in the development of human health risk assessment framework. And MP microplastic, we call it MP, microplastic being a various size, shape, and a mass-based ingestion rate is actually a fundamental first step. And by applying particle size distribution and fundamental principles of microplastic, which is volume versus density, and the data available from various evidences, we have analyzed the uncertainties in the existing data and estimated that globally, on an average, humans could ingest up to 5.5 grams of microplastics of 0 to 1 mm size. So note that although microplastics are defined as size up to 5 millimeter, in our estimation, we excluded any size above 1 millimeter based on the notion that smaller the size of microplastic is more likely to present a greater risk to humans, having greater ability to translocate and biodistribute in the body. So number one solution to plastic pollution is to reduce the use, and human behavior and regulations will underpin this change. Our study results were used by our partner WWF to develop an intelligent risk communication tool using a credit card as an analogy for maximum ingestion rate, and which has reached billions of people. We also underpin the development of first web-backed tool called Your Plastic Diet, which is accessed by more than 2 million people until now. So random risk reports on microplastic were consolidated in the study using credit card as an analogy and hopefully playing its role in human mind and make us think every time we use this credit card to buy unwanted plastics. So in our study, as you see, the maximum concern, the estimation was 5.5 gram per week. But under various scenarios, this can change. And this amount of ingestion can change based on your diet, based on your geographic location. And we allowed room for all kind of variabilities. And we also highlighted the future research need to have a reliable estimation. Because unlike chemicals, microplastics are hard to have an accurate concentration because of various challenges. But harmonized method can help us get there. And after we estimated this number last year, we have seen lots of nervous new findings, such as microplastics in tea bags, microplastics in human placenta, and various other organisms which are destined for human consumption. And it made us to think, is our study still an underestimation? And based on the fact billions of new particles were found in these diet sources, considering numbers reported in these recent reports, ours is still an underestimation. However, we should not consider studies in isolation, like 1 or 2 studies. We need more studies and to make a statistically valid assumptions and calculations. So what next in terms of research and policy issue based on our research outcome is that developing comprehensive roadmap for the risk assessment of plastic should consider microplastic as a 3-dimensional toxicant. Here I mean microplastic is a unique contaminant in the environment where it's not just the polymer particles, and it's also associated chemical contaminants such as what you see in this picture. Some of those contaminants are potentially carcinogenic and some are even proven carcinogenic. And also the biological contaminants such as pathogen. We have found in our other study reports that the pathogens are still persist even if it passes through the wastewater treatment process. And if plastics are found in the environment, and we are able to see some of the potentially dangerous pathogens associated with it. So plastic should be approached as a 3-dimensional toxicant in the risk assessment paradigm. Also, the studies should focus on the total environmental exposure, because often studies will use a convenient way using exposure from water or any particular diet like fish, but this will not give us accurate data on human health risk. So what we need to achieve this is that harmonized sampling and analytical methods, which is often raised in various reports and agendas. And also we have to measure the internal exposure and kinetics. That is the real exposure. It's not how much we drink or eat, how much ultimately end up in your organs and circulatory system. And what is the subsequent immunological hazards and measurement in various human matrices that is still lacking. And just recent studies on human placenta is just a start. I hope there are a lot of studies are emerging. And the translocation over internal barriers is another important parameter that needs to be looked, that has to be studied for risk assessment. And hazards from the plastic associated with pathogen is taken lightly. But our studies and various published studies shows that these pathogens attached on plastic surface is really persist for a long time. And it is very relevant at this COVID time. And as you may know, the paper published in Hunter New Public Health Journal that COVID pathogen can survive in plastics up to 9 days. So this is an important parameter to study. And also we have to define the toxicity threshold for ingestion of microplastic. That's where our one of the studies I reported here, mass of microplastics important. That will help us to define the threshold. And ultimately, all these results outcome can be fed back into policies to reduce the exposure. And
so, Mr. Palanisamy,
yeah.
Just to wrap up, so what you're saying is that the science community, is the science community doing enough? Or is there much more that has to be done in order to inform political and international organizations' work on the plastic governance issue?
Yeah, it's a good question, Michael. Actually, science community is doing a lot, but it is scattered, and we are only skimming the surface. What I am insisting here is we have to go deep, because it's a global problem, and so we have to go deep. That's where we have to go more in-depth analysis, especially on human health. I'm talking on human health aspect, and I'm not about others, and it's not about how many grams we ingest. I would be concerned even one piece of plastic in my child's diet. And so what we want to do is do our best to leave a better world for our future generation. So what we do is not enough. We need to go deeper.
Thank you very much. And I really also want to find out what my weekly dose of credit card of plastic does to my body. Thank you so much, Mr. Palanisamy.
Thank you, Miguel.
And
thank you, esteemed delegates and guests. A great opportunity to talk. Thank you.
Yeah, and invite also all the participants to add questions on the chat, because we'll go back to you to have more information. But this allows me to switch to the next speaker, and I want to insist that we have planned for 7 minutes for the next speaker, and Mrs. Sarah Brosh. Can you hear us?
Thank you very much. I can hear you well.
Okay, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. And I could have the next slide, please. So, as mentioned in the beginning, IPEN is a global network of non-profit public interest organizations in more than 120 countries today, working together for a toxics-free future for all. And together we work on the local, regional, and international level to prevent harm from chemicals and waste. Next, please. Not everyone realizes that every stage of the plastic life cycle is associated with hazardous chemicals. And that is from extraction of fossil fuels through production, use, and recycling until product end of life. And I will, in this very brief presentation, touch upon a very few examples of why this is a problem. Next, please. So first, just to highlight that virtually all plastics in use today contain chemical additives because they are necessary to provide the specific properties such as flexibility, color, durability, and so on. I listed a few here in the table. So you have, for example, no soft PVC without plasticizers. So in this slide, I've also listed some hazardous additives that are actually still in use in some or in many countries today to show the extent of the problem. Next, please. So why is this important? Maybe that's obvious, but that is because hazardous additives can harm human health through many different mechanisms. For example, many of the hazardous additives are so-called endocrine disrupting chemicals that can cause a wide variety of harm at very low concentrations. I have listed a couple of examples here to show that common additives such as phthalates and fluorinated compounds can cause a wide variety of effects such as cancer, affect the immune system, impair neurodevelopment, and harm pregnancies. And there are many more additives and many more health effects. So I will highly recommend the report. I put a picture here on, which is written by experts at the Endocrine Society and produced together with IPEN, that explains all these effects in detail. And that's posted on the IPEN website. Next, please. And just to underscore this point, I just wanted to show this conclusion from a study made in the EU of chemical additives to plastic. That revealed that a large percentage of these additives are in fact under different types of regulatory scrutiny in the EU. And I added that link as well, even though it's in very small, it's tiny, so you can look at the details yourselves, but that also gives an indication of the hazardous additives. Next, please. It's also very important to know that chemical additives are not removed during the recycling process, but are actually transferred to the new product. And new hazardous substances can be generated by the recycling process itself. So that means that you will have hazardous chemicals that spread during the recycling process and can contaminate all sorts of plastics. A well-known example is the recycling of plastics containing brominated flame retardants listed under the Stockholm Convention, leading to contamination of plastics used to make, for example, children's toys. And this is also explained in much more detail in the report here on the left, as well as the reports that are specifically on toxic recycling posted here, which are also on the IPEN website. Next, please. Yes. Also, there is no good way of dealing with hazardous chemicals during the disposal process. Incineration will release pollutants to the air and also generate a large amount of ash that is very likely needs to be treated as hazardous waste. And landfill will result in leaching of these chemicals. And this waste problem is especially clear when you look at the export of plastic waste to countries that don't have the capacity to deal with them. Because this plastic will in many cases be openly burned, which will release toxic chemicals such as dioxins to the air. And that contaminates the soil and will introduce toxic chemicals into the food chain. Next, please. So what are the solutions to this? Well, there are already some existing agreements in place that can be utilized to prevent harm from hazardous plastic additives. There are already a number of them listed under the Stockholm Convention on persistent organic pollutants. And currently, a UV stabilizer commonly used in plastics is under evaluation. And actually, just last week, the expert committee for the convention concluded that this UV stabilizer meets the screening criteria of the convention. And one way to make this process more effective in the future is to look more at grouping approaches. So not only evaluating chemicals one by one, but looking, for example, at similar UV stabilizers that could be grouped and assessed at the same time, as well as similar fluorinated substances that could be grouped and addressed in a more effective way. Looking at the Basel Convention, it already addresses plastic waste export, but there are also additional provisions under the convention that could be utilized, and those are around hazardous constituents and properties that could be used to classify much more of the plastic waste as hazardous waste. And that would mean much stronger requirements under the convention, but also an export prohibition of export from developed to developing countries. And I will also want to mention the strategic approach to international chemicals management, SICHM. It is a voluntary framework, but it already focuses on many issues that are relevant for plastics and chemicals in plastics. So that includes endocrine disrupting chemicals and chemicals in products. So there is much that could be utilized through the current SICHM and also to be looked at for the SICHM Beyond 2020 process. Next, please. And to conclude this very brief presentation, I also want to mention a few more things that I think needs to be done. Of course, as mentioned, the existing global controls needs to be utilized as much as possible, but also there has to be more national and regional regulatory action to prohibit the use of hazardous chemicals in plastics. And there are also other useful regulatory tools that could include motivations for substitution of hazardous chemicals, such as taxes, and also obligations in relation to extended producer responsibilities. And while regulations is the most important solution, there should also be labeling requirements that shows what chemical content is in the consumer products that you buy, because that would enable consumers to have the ability to choose the products they want without hazardous chemicals. And of course, there has also to be a dramatic decrease of production of new plastics, in addition to regulating what is in these plastics. And for the final slide, if I have next, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity for this brief presentation, and also to add my contact information, and I will be happy to discuss this more at the Q&A and at other times as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Brosh, and also for respecting the time and bring this very important insight on the aspect of the hazardous chemical additives to plastic and this issue. We'll come back to that later. And I will just give the floor to our third speaker of our second part on setting the scene, which will be Mr. Paul Rose. Do you hear us? Mr. Rose?
Hi, Miguel. Yep, how's that?
Okay, yes, that works.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. You have the floor.
Great. Thanks very much. Well, as Miguel says, I'm an explorer. I'm a science expedition leader. I work mostly in the Antarctic and up in the Arctic, and nearly, and a lot of the warmer, remote, challenging places in between. And if I'm ever asked, to summarize my life as an explorer, I'll often say, and it's not a throwaway line, that I see a lot less fish and a lot more plastic. And we're finding plastic everywhere. All the old dives I made as a young man, I started diving in 1969. When I go back to those old sites, I can put money on the fact that I'll see a lot less fish and a lot more rubbish in the sea. And of course, when I go to those beautiful remote Arctic beaches that I know so well, that used to be pristine, I now see big piles and balls of plastic and all the rubbish we somehow get acclimatized to seeing in the more temperate zones. It's heartbreaking. And at sea, at pristine seas, one of the science samples we take is water samples, and every single water sample we take contains plastic. It's difficult to look down into those amazing blue waters, and we can't wait to jump in and get diving and realize that as beautiful as they look, they do have plastic in them. And Monica, thanks for bringing up the story about the birds. I mean, this was an amazing moment when we saw those beautiful albatross chicks on the Marshall Islands, as you say, dead on the beach with their stomachs open, full of very recognizable personal items, lighters and bottle tops from plastic bottles. And then my experience, I didn't go to the Marshall Islands, but I do present BBC documentaries. And the one I did on plastics, I was working with the scientist and cutting open the beautiful seabirds on the northeast coast of Britain. And every single seabird we picked up, and with some technical help, I cut open those stomachs, and you could feel and see plastic in there in every single bird that we sampled. And I remember saying to the television camera, anybody that doubts we have a plastic problem should be forced to do this. And who would have thought we'd ever see the day when National Geographic magazine on the front cover would have those amazing pictures of birds caught in plastic, or that iceberg, which you, at first chance, when you look at it, you go, oh, it's an iceberg, and then suddenly realize, oh, hang on, it's a white plastic bag. I remember really celebrating when we saw the news. I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, wasn't it, when we saw the scientific news that nanoplastics were proven to cross the blood-brain barrier in fish, and therefore it stands to reason, I thought, it must be inside us. Well, I was ready to pop some champagne at that moment, thinking, wow, we've done it. We've really done it. It's as this out of control chemistry experiment going on inside our own bodies is about to finish. We've got the ultimate motivator for action. Plastic is inside us. Things are going to change. But as we all know, things didn't change. And it was very frustrating to see that kind of news pushed way back in the papers. But there has been progress. There is good news. In my role as ambassador to the UN Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm conventions, I was in Geneva for the triple COPs when the plastic waste amendments were agreed. And now that truly was a champagne moment. You know, it clarified the way plastic waste is internationally traded, and it brought additional types of plastic waste into the control mechanism. And on the 1st of January this year, 21, these internationally enforceable rules came into force. And it really, fingers crossed here, is the end of the Wild West, as we call it, of trading in plastic waste. Also, there's some terrific projects out there, and ones to highlight are the networks, Zoological Society London, National Geographic, EcoNil project. And that's all based around recovering ghost fishing nets, abandoned fishing nets from the sea, shipping them to Slovenia, to Ljubljana, to an amazing plant there, EcoNil. And I think if we could magically all suddenly be somewhere physically together, my vote would be we would be in Ljubljana in this amazing plant and seeing how all of this material gets processed into beautiful, almost, you know, virgin nylon, and is then sold into very desirable goods. And there's other technologies too, such as Mura, who have come up with a project called Catalytic Hydrothermal Reactor as a way of recycling. I think too, it's probably good news that our culture has changed so much. We've got regular rubbish pickup events, beach cleans and debris dives. If you're a scuba diver, you know what I mean about debris dives, because all of us have spent quite a bit of time swimming around in lakes, rivers and oceans, picking up rubbish. I've also seen such a change in social acceptance too. As a young boy growing up on the east side of London, I can still picture those images, walking along behind people. They're opening up a cigarette packet, and the thin plastic cover outside the packet, they just throw away. Well, now you don't see that. That would be completely unacceptable socially. And let's all celebrate now the brilliant young people's leadership and impatience for action. That's really something to think about. That is a great hope for the future. But with all this activity going, plus the regular science and technical reports that can get hidden back in the news, we all do need a trustworthy, accurate favorite channel. And I'm using the Plastic Health Coalition because it frames plastic pollution as a human health issue. Alarm bells are ringing, and the suspected health risks that plastic poses and new scientific research is now needed more than ever. So the Plastic Soup Foundation created a new research and advocacy alliance, which is called the Plastic Health Coalition. With the coalition, various national and international environmental research organizations join forces to encourage, enhance, and then disseminate scientific research into the health effects of plastic. They're a really great group. I love working with them. And there's an invitation for everybody here. If you're a scientist and you've got results that you want to share with the world, contact the Plastic Soup Foundation and we'll make sure you get the international stage for it. The 2019 Plastic Health Summit was such a huge success that they decided to do it for the next 2 years. And the first ever Global Health Summit, just listen to these numbers of leading scientists, policymakers, influencers, and innovators united in one goal, the search for answers. And the summit had 36 speakers, 14 different nationalities who shared their experiences throughout the day. And the numbers are amazing. Before, during, and after the event, the message reached 2 billion people. And 12 million were reached through social media, and that doesn't include Instagram. And the second Plastic Health Summit occurs in Amsterdam, October the 5th. Fingers crossed again, we might actually physically be there together, and you're invited to attend. The Plastic Health Summit started a YouTube and to share updates, and I do recommend you get on it. And I do have some comments here on opportunities in policy. Today, the UK government opened applications for calls to groups to bring the climate summit to life, COP26 in Glasgow in November. This feels like a great opportunity for our plastics work, and I do recommend you go onto the UK government COP26 site, Calls for Action. It looks very inviting, I must say. I might put a project up there myself.
Paul?
Yes.
Yeah, I really hope that we'll all be able very soon to meet in person in this Plastic Health Summit. Thank you so much for your inputs today. You mentioned the alarm bells are ringing. Young people are impatient, but are we really leaving the Wild West, as you mentioned? That leads me to our next part of the session, where we'll speak about plastic and health governance. And the real pleasure to introduce to you our distinguished representative of the Permanent Mission of Uruguay, my colleague Valentina Sierra. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Great, so you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to start thanking Diana and the Geneva Environment Network for the invitation to join these important discussions and to have the opportunity to meet virtually with all of you. Nowadays, plastic litter is one of the greatest environmental threats to our planet. Scientific evidence has shown that marine litter presents risk both on human health and for the environment. Plastic becomes a problem when it's transformed into garbage, when it's discarded after being used just once, and there are no recycling or collection strategies. But the problem is not only there, it's more complex. That's why a life cycle approach is needed. Some plastics contain a chemical harmful to human health and the environment, and health impacts occur at every stage of the plastic life cycle. In that sense, I would like to refer to the recent report of IPEN that Sarah mentioned, titled Plastics, EDCs and Health. This report identifies 7 harmful chemical types in plastics. It explains what they are, their exposure routes, and what most caught my attention, the health impacts. To protect health and ecosystems, harmful chemicals needed to be excluded from the value chain as early as possible. That will allow a better recyclability of plastics and a toxic-free circularity. As you may know, at the international level, a new framework for SAICOM and the sound management of chemicals and waste beyond 2020 is under discussion at the intersessional process. And we expect to present recommendations to the 5th International Conference on Chemicals Management for its adoption. SAICOM, as an inclusive, multi-stakeholder and multi-sectoral framework, provides the opportunity to discuss, to coordinate, and to act together on chemicals throughout their life cycle. Indeed, a number of areas linked to marine plastic litter and microplastic also were considered as emerging policy issues under SAICOM. That includes EDCs and nanomaterials, among others. The Beyond 2020 framework will provide opportunities for new areas of work, for capacity building, for knowledge sharing, and for promoting innovation. We also consider that it is very important to have a science policy interface for all the chemical and waste cluster. That is definitely needed. On the other hand, under Basel Convention, Uruguay has been deeply involved with the creation of the Plastic Waste Partnership that was established to mobilize diverse stakeholders, as you may know, also resources and expertise to assist to the implementation and to provide practical support. At the same time, we co-sponsored the amendments of the convention to include plastic waste, which Paul just mentioned, that will make that global trade more transparent, better regulated, and will also ensure that its management is safer for human health and for the environment. Also, Uruguay has been part of the UNEP Clean Seas campaign, and last year we joined a group of friends to combat plastic pollution in New York. There is a need to raise awareness on current gaps and to have human rights-based approach to address the plastic crisis. We welcome initiatives like the Alliance to End Plastic Waste from the private sector and the MANTA project from the Sea Cleaners NGOs. And we consider it fundamental to explore further opportunities to engage with academy, private sector, and civil society organizations in order to advance in this matter. At the regional level, I have to mention the significant role of the Basel and Stockholm regional centers that are based in Uruguay. They are already making a relevant contribution in supporting the parties on a wide range of issues related to plastic, as well as by providing technical assistance. At the national level, we're implementing different laws regarding the use of non-returnable containers, the sustainable use of plastic bags, and more recently, we passed the Comprehensive Waste Management Law, which seeks to prevent and to reduce the negative impacts of waste management at all stages. In addition, we are developing a strategy to reduce marine litter and microplastics under the Freplata project. And the Uruguayan Antarctic Institute is carrying out a project for the diagnosis and the evaluation of marine litter and microplastic in the Antarctic. However, much more action is needed to address this challenge. That will require common global actions involving public policy, as well as deep changes in social and commercial behavior. That includes manufacturers, traders, and consumers. Finally, on last August, we established a new Ministry of Environment in Uruguay, and the priorities are centered on the water quality, its status in the basins, on the production process, as well as on waste management. In that sense, we are currently exploring the global response options that were developed by the ad hoc expert group on marine litter and microplastics, including a new global agreement. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Valentina Sierra, and thanks for the leadership of Uruguay, also as Vice President of the ICCM5, and congratulations for the creation of this new Ministry of Environment and your leadership. Hopefully it can inspire others. So as Mr. Palanisamy said earlier, there's no better time to discuss the plastic issue. So let's discuss it. And I will start with WHO. I mean, Mrs. Sierra just mentioned that we need a science policy interface on the plastic issue. And we all know the important role of WHO as a normative and a scientific organization of health. So maybe give the floor to WHO to maybe know how can these issues that have been mentioned before by the speakers, how does WHO address these issues? And how do you see what's next to advance the agenda, the plastic pollution agenda? So if I can give the floor again to Mrs. Marianera. Okay, if there seems to be an issue, we can always go back later once you're ready. And maybe I'll, in this case, go directly to address the issue of what UNEP is doing towards a pollution-free planet. Monica, can you address?
Yes, that's fine. I'm ready to go here.
So addressing the questions to you, I mean, how does this issue addressed by UNEP, and what can, looking forward, in what forum do you see them being addressed going forward?
I think there are a couple of forums to go forward. As you know, that this has been maybe we passed it now, the beyond 2020 and the post 2020 eras for both chemicals management and for biodiversity targets. And I think what we need to do is use these forums to set the agenda going forward. And we're certainly working very hard on that with our colleagues in the biodiversity side, as well as to raise the importance of considering both the health and pollution aspects from a chemicals management and from a waste perspective. So the time is right to do that now. And I think the work that the various groups are doing both on the biodiversity post-2020 framework and the chemicals management beyond 2020 frameworks are going to be critical in this regard. So let's just quickly go through and start with, why are we concerned about plastics in the health context? And I think we've heard from some of the other speakers why this is so. But let me just reiterate by saying, of course, that plastics do contain chemicals, and many of which are harmful to human health and also to the rest of life in the environment. But let me not sort of dwell too much on that, but we have already heard from our other speakers on that. What is UNEP doing in this regard as the custodian of the environmental agenda within the UN system and globally? Well, last year, UNEP developed an assessment report on issues of concern as requested by the United Nations Environment Assembly, which includes the impact of microplastics on environment and health, as well as sections on bisphenol A, phthalates, polyfluorinated chemicals, and other issues linked to plastics, including nanomaterials and chemicals in products. And these reports are available on our website, just so you know. We're also developing a paper on chemicals in plastics and undertaking discussions, as I said in answer to your question, on chemicals and waste framework beyond 2020, including issues of concern. Furthermore, in 2019, the Basel Convention, as we know, added plastic waste to its legally binding framework. And a number of substances of concern are already being controlled at the global level under the Stockholm Convention. Second slide. On the global level, the last session of the ad hoc open-ended expert group on marine litter and microplastics led to a chair's summary that will be presented to the 5th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly to inform member states and stakeholders of the potential options for continued work on marine litter and microplastics. And we've heard from a number of speakers on how important and essential that is. UNEP is also involved in setting a roadmap for circularity in plastics and is collaborating on the new plastics economy global commitment led by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And also, UNEP has focused its work on plastics in the implementation plan towards a pollution-free planet, an implementation plan that was endorsed by all member states at UNEA. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get on. But this graph is actually a little bit disconcerting as far as I'm concerned, and it was produced in the assessment of the Global Chemicals Outlook 2nd edition. And it put together a picture of the regional and global plastic production estimates. About 7.8 billion tons of plastic resins and fibers were manufactured in the 65 years between 1950 and 2015. Half of this amount was produced in the past 13 years alone. In terms of waste, less than 9% of the 6.3 billion tons of plastic waste generated up to 2015 has been recycled, and only 12% was incinerated, 79% being disposed of in landfills and in the environment. If current production and use trends continue unabated, the annual global production is estimated to increase from 350 million tons in 2017 to a staggering 2 billion tons by 2050. With this prospect, we cannot delay action and action on all fronts. Next slide on plastic pollution. Studies suggest that about 6 to 10% of global plastic production is released into the ocean, and that 1/3 of all plastic waste ends up in soils or fresh water. And while this waste is a very important global issue, it also contains chemical contamination. And beyond that, we know that it's a health issue that we've heard from previous speakers. What we haven't heard so much of is that microplastic waste may be fueling the spread of antimicrobial resistance, as plastic pollution facilitates increased gene exchange among bacteria by acting as a substrate for bacteria to grow and interact. Open burning of waste has been found to be the most significant source of emissions, the air of dioxins and furans, which we know are classified as human carcinogens by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. This poses a serious environmental and human health issue, particularly in developing countries. In India, for example, dioxins and furans have been found in soils near informal e-waste recycling sites and nearby open dump sites of large cities. This is attributed in part to the combustion of plastic materials. We need to keep in mind that what is unhealthy and harmful for humans can be harmful, if not devastating, to the rest of life around us. Plants, animals, and the productive bacteria and fungi, many of which are critical to food production and the healthy decomposition and detoxification cycles in the environment. Next slide. To address plastic pollution holistically, a full life cycle approach and resource circularity understanding is needed. Preventative measures should be taken from the design stage and in our consumption and production patterns. And as we've also already heard, ways and means to reduce the amount of plastics and plastic additives in the entire value chain. We've also heard from previous speakers that chemical additives and contaminants from processing can leach from plastic products, for example, phthalates and bisphenol A, and may become residues in other products. For example, if food products absorb chemicals from plastics and packaging. Or they can impact circularity when plastics are recycled into secondary raw materials, whereby the resultant products may contain chemical traces from the original product applications. So making informed decisions that address plastic pollution demands a full life cycle approach and resource circularity understanding to take into account these potential trade-offs. Next slide. Launched in 2018, the New Plastics Economy Global Commitment unites businesses, governments, and other organizations from around the world behind a common vision and a set of 2025 targets to address the problem. There's a lot of information on this slide, and I'll let you sort of read it, and keep in mind that these slides will be available after the end of the presentations. And my penultimate slide, and I know I'm running out of time, I just want to talk a little bit about the Towards a Pollution-Free Planet implementation plan that all member states signed on to at the United Nations Environment Assembly. This slide sort of captures where some of the challenges and the gaps are, and what are the action areas that we need to address if we are to take a full picture and holistic view of how we need to address these challenges. So finally, my final slide here. Let me conclude by reminding all of us that we need a concerted and connected effort of all players and partners in addressing the ubiquitous and multifaceted challenges of plastics in the environment and their impact on all life, not just ours. Just from a governance perspective, my last point, UNEP in partnership with the chemicals-related MEAs, SciChem, and others are working with our colleagues and counterparts in the biodiversity community and the MEAs to raise awareness of the need to complement each other in their deliberations of both the post-2020 biodiversity and the beyond 2020 chemicals management frameworks to acknowledge the role of chemicals to life on this planet and biodiversity. So while we celebrate the successes of things like beach cleanups, perhaps we should strive for a world where we never have to do another beach cleanup. So let me end there, and I'm happy to take some questions after this is finished. Thanks.
Thank you, Monica, and thanks for the presentation. I'm relieved, actually, because I know it was planned, but I certainly thought that you had finished your intervention. But thank you very much. And maybe just a follow-up question. I mean, we're talking about Wild West, and I think like citizen organized cleaning effort, that's Wild West, governance structure, that's far away from Wild West. Well, it was mentioned we left the Wild West of plastic pollution governance, but I wonder where we are in reaching our targets. You mentioned 2025 targets. Where we are? Are we on track? What needs to be done? Are things going in the right direction, or do you think an enormous effort is necessary?
Well, I think the unfortunate reality is that the goals that were set out under the SciChem framework, as was analyzed and published in the Global Chemicals Outlook 2nd edition, have shown that we did not meet the goals and the targets that we had set out globally, collectively, and that we really do need a sort of rethink of the barriers. And that's where I think the pollution implementation plan for a pollution-free planet comes in, because it helped to identify the gaps of why we didn't meet those really lofty goals that the world aspired to. So I think the short answer is no, but progress has been made, and I think there's a clear understanding that a much more concerted effort and connected effort, as I said, needs to be made now that we have a clear understanding that we're way behind in terms of what we aspired to. So that's my 2 cents, and I'll let some of the other panel members add into that as well from a different perspective.
Thank you very much, Monica. And I want to encourage again participants to ask questions if they may.
Miguel, there is Jennifer de France, who is now unmuted from WHO, who wanted to say.
Okay, wonderful. That's great news. Basically, we wanted to know what WHO is doing in addressing the issues that have been mentioned by the panel, and what way forward that you see on the plastic pollution agenda.
Thank you for those questions. And firstly, my apologies. Maria had to leave very urgently for our executive board unexpectedly. So thank you for letting me speak on behalf of Maria and WHO. And just to introduce myself very quickly, I'm Jennifer de France with the Water, Sanitation, Hygiene and Health team, and I was involved in the WHO report on microplastics in drinking water. So in terms of WHO's work, as Maria mentioned, I mean, a key publication was this manifesto for healthy and green recovery. And so this whole idea of reestablishing our relationship with nature is critical, and a critical concept in considering the need to stopping pollution, including the plastic pollution problem. So in terms of the actual evidence and impacts on health, as I mentioned, we have this report on microplastics in drinking water that was published in 2019. It was really an immediate response to many of the headlines and concerns we saw about the occurrence of microplastics in drinking water. We heard about the risks from the plastic particles themselves, potentially the pathogens, chemicals, those were all considered in this WHO report on microplastics in drinking water. We looked at the occurrence data, the quality of the studies, the health effects data, effectiveness of water treatment, etc. Right now, we are working on a wider report on exposure to microplastics from the wider environment. And that's already been alluded to, that it's key to understand total exposure, considering that microplastics are everywhere, everywhere in the environment, and we're finding it everywhere in animals to all in the human bodies all over. So this report will be coming out later this year. And like the drinking water report, we're also looking at not just the studies on occurrence and the health effects, but also we need to look at the quality of these studies, because this is an emerging area and we need to put into context the quality of these studies and interpreting the findings. A key recommendation in the drinking water report, and that we will continue to make in this wider report aligned with the manifesto, is that regardless of the human health impacts, we need to address this plastic pollution problem, and we need to address it from the manufacturing all the way to disposal. So this was brought up by UNEP, by Uruguay, etc. And we really need to look at this holistically and address that problem, irrespective of the concern, and recognizing too, and the nice presentation I saw showing the increase in plastic production is. So microplastics in the environment will continue to increase. So we need to address this problem now. For next steps, our report and our drinking water report, as well as this wider report, we are also highlighting what are the key research needs. So it really is an emerging area, and there needs to be more done on the research. And with limited resources, I think it's really critical to identify what are the key research gaps. We also need to consider the context of what are microplastic risks with other risks in the environment. So particulates in air, considering that, and particulates and other sources of plastics in food. And so in better understanding occurrence, I think it's really critical to understand what are the sources of that pollution. And this is really important to inform management actions so that we know where action should be taken. Some food studies have shown that it's maybe the food processing. So we really need to understand this to inform what are the most cost-effective actions to take. With that, I think that's enough for now, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Jennifer, it's Paul here. I hope you're celebrating the US re-engagement with WHO now.
Absolutely. I think a lot of the world is, yes. I see it with
telling me. Great.
Yeah, that underlines also why Maria and I had to leave. We were currently the executive board of WHO going on. But I still want to take, we only have a few minutes left, the opportunity to get some external questions. If Malou, if you want to come in with some questions, otherwise I will have a few for the panel. But Malou, please, from the Geneva Environment Network.
Hi, good afternoon. So we received several questions on WebEx and also on Facebook, and we will try to address what is possible given the time. So I have the first question from David Azoulay of Ciel. How are the various routes of exposure, for example, ingestion, but also inhalation, considered in the current research and policy agenda? What would the speakers recommend to ensure consideration of full impacts of plastics, such as multiple exposure routes and full life cycle considerations? I have another question from Andrew Russell. Shouldn't we be applying the precautionary principle more vigorously to resist plastic, such as assuming that all additives are toxic unless proven otherwise, and that no level of microplastic is safe in food unless proven otherwise? In addition, that no plastic is safe to transport under Basel Convention or use for food contact unless proven to have no toxin. And the third question from Christopher Faria. Producers, being in a growing and highly lucrative industry, should also be held accountable. Is it possible to expand many global sites to recycle plastic? So back to you, Miguel.
Sorry, can you just summarize the first questions? I have the other two others.
Okay, the first question from David is how are the various routes of exposure to plastic being considered in the current research and policy agenda?
Okay.
For example, ingestion, also inhalation, multiple exposure routes, and also the full life cycle of plastic.
Thank you very much. I will propose to address the first questions to Mr. Palanisamy. Do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I can give it a go. So it's a good question. So as I pointed in my presentation, so I'm not aware current policy decisions considering all the multiple exposure, but like WHO report, based on the available evidences, there are two routes: ingestion and inhalation. An ingestion route almost well established, but inhalation route is still emerging, as there are various challenges in that, because we have indoor and outdoor, and from the preliminary investigations, it shows we have more microplastics in the indoor air than outdoor air. So there's a lot of challenge in establishing inhalation route. So that's where I think the policy changes or regulatory changes are waiting for more studies.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Miguel, if I can have a quick
yes,
comment, please.
You can come in, no problem.
Yeah, thank you. As well as that, and thank you, Tyler, and thank you, Miguel. I just wonder when we would normally see our body burden test being within a normal health check. Can you imagine? I'm yet to go for mine, but this is the great check where they take quite a lot of blood and work out exactly what you have within your body. Is it PCBs? How much plastic? Lead? And all the rest of it, mercury, you name it. So the idea, wouldn't it, I have a dream that when you have your annual health check, we would all have a body burden check. And as we're all voters, that would soon change the way we do business, I think.
Thank you, Paul. On this, I will just move to the second question. What are the precautionary measures that we need to put in place? And I wonder who wants to come in on that one.
I'd be happy to answer partly.
Okay, you are.
Jennifer with WHO. So certainly the precautionary principle is important, and WHO goes with a Rio Declaration of the precautionary principle, which also considers cost effectiveness. And I think that's really critical to consider, in that with limited resources, we don't want to take away those resources to address microplastics if it's diverted to more important issues. So certainly we know plastics and this plastic pollution problem is a huge issue, and I'm not trying to undermine that, but we need to have this balance, right? And that's why I think it's really important to have this prioritized research agenda. And so just to give an example from the drinking water side, we know almost 2 billion people are drinking water that's microbially contaminated. It's causing about 500,000 deaths a year. And this is a real threat to drinking water. And so any efforts to deal with microplastics in water should not undermine this real threat from microbial pollution. Now, incidentally, if you address microbial pathogens by improving water treatment, you will remove a lot of particulates, including microplastics. So it's a win-win benefit to improve microbial safety of water, and you'll be addressing some of the microplastic issue.
Thank you. And I see that Sarah Brosche also wanted to come in on that question, but I will add the third question as well. I also want to address to you. So if you can answer the one on precautionary measure, but also the one on what manufacturers can do.
Well, thank you very much. Just to talk just a little bit about the precautionary principle and the practicalities. So considering the amount of hazardous additives or the number of them that are used today, I think it's important to, and this goes for what manufacturers can do as well, start replacing the most hazardous ones with safe ones. And there you have to apply the precautionary principles, are the indication of harm and hazard of these replacements. So from my perspective, I think you need to start looking at the overall additives that are used, which are the worst ones today, so to speak, start replacing those, and then look at the replacements to make sure that they are safe. And I think this is really important, and also something that people don't think about much, as mentioned in one of the questions. So I think that's also very important to communicate to the public as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm still on the third question, how to involve the manufacturers. And I see Monica already wants to take the floor. And that's exactly what I wanted to do, to give the floor to a representative for UNEP to how they engage with the private sector.
Thank you very much, Miguel. And just to sort of build on the past question, I just want to point out that what Andrew is asking is actually a very, very important question. And so what we have is a preponderance of evidence that shows we should be doing better, and that we should be taking that science and applying it from a precautionary principle and other perspectives as well. We need to understand why we're not, and why industry isn't, and why government isn't, and why the regulations aren't strong enough in the enforcement, and on and on and on like that. The aspirational objectives are there in many, many ways. And I think one of the things that that Sarah has just brought up, we need to look at the successes as well, and to build on those. So for example, if you go to any shop now, you can find plastic containers that say BPA free. And so in some sectors, the message has gotten across, and the alternatives are there to take potentially harmful chemicals out of plastic. And we need to promote that more, and we need to promote substitutions more in the entire process. And that goes to the value chain design that we've talked about already. Now, in terms of some of the industry mechanisms and the industry role in that, I think industry is playing a very good role. But I also think that industry needs to step up and take a much more proactive role and say, we can and we will be innovative, and we will build on successes and expand our successes as well. And so we need to support industry in that way to really do the good and right things that governments want to do, and that governments in a way create that enabling environment to make it incentivized for industry to really do the good and right things that the evidence is there to support. There is still a lot of room for more research and greater understanding, so we don't allow people to have the opportunity to say there isn't enough evidence, there isn't enough research. So we have to continue on all fronts to look at the impacts of plastics and plastic additives in the value chain and through the resource circularity understanding to really change the way we do things. The good examples are there, and we need leadership from industry and from government and from society to say that this is the direction we want to go, and we demand it. So I think it's there. It's just a matter of doing more of it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Monica. And I see the time flowing, and I would like to offer the possibility for one last question from the participants. Malu, if you can formulate one last question.
Yes, hi. So we have a question from Andy Clay. Most people understand the negative impact of plastic pollution on environmental health, but very few seem to make the connection with human health. Shouldn't the different organizations communicate more these risks to the general public and also to the industry? Thank you.
So this is obviously addressed to UNEP and WHO, but maybe someone else would like to come in from the outside. I see Paul ready to come in.
Hey, thank you, Malu, and thank you, Miguel. Yes, when we get issues like this, whether it's climate change or plastic pollution or plastic health issues, I always wonder why we as a society can't get the news changed. So, the ticker tape that runs across the bottom of the news, and sometimes the reporter is speaking on something, and then underneath it's got football scores or all kinds of other latest news. Why that latest news couldn't be picked up with key health messages. I would love to see a news reporter speaking on plastic, and then underneath really useful information about why we know it, how the research was conducted, and how to learn more. And I think that would go a long way to re-educating the public and therefore helping make smart decisions made in politics.
Thank you, Paul. And I want to take this last one actually to Valentina Sierra. I mean, I understand that what are the expectations do you have as a permanent mission towards the international organizations that you intervene with in order to communicate this message? And what do you think has to be done in this field?
Thank you, Miguel, for your question, and thank you, Paul, for that brilliant idea. I think indeed all the chemical clusters need more awareness. Raising awareness is needed, and also to generate political will and consciousness. And also, I think the pressure of the youth is very important, and also for the scientific sector to communicate better, to communicate in a simple way, so everyone can understand the problems and the impacts that in this case plastic waste or marine litter could have on the human health and on the environment. Thank you very much, and I'll go back to maybe the WHO and UNEP. If you can say a few words, if you as an organization you think what can be done to communicate this issue more and to do more outreach and also to collaborate amongst each other.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Miguel. And you know, I think one of the things that is critically important is not just about communicating more, but it's the type of communication, it's the quality of the communication, it's the confidence in the communication that we send to our various stakeholder groups. And so we need to be very wary of not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. And even though we have a preponderance of evidence, it has to be communicated well, but it also needs to convey that confidence that even though one study might be inconclusive, it doesn't negate all of the other work that points us in a particular direction for action and for policy making. As we know that things evolve over time, you know, science doesn't stop one day to the next, and we're always learning about how, you know, we're affecting the world around us. But we do have, you know, sufficient information to make certain, you know, types of decisions, and we need to do that step by step with new research to continue funding and supporting research so that we have better and better and better understanding. And so policy has to evolve with the science. It can't just stop and start, and we need to make sure that we're basing our decisions on sound science. The two are very much connected, but how we communicate that with that confidence and with that voice of authority is absolutely critical to getting people to believe and to change behavior and to go ahead with policies in a confident way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but I see that Maria is back online. If you want to say a few closing words before I close the session. We're just talking about the outreach that the organization can do on the plastic pollution agenda.
Yes, thank you, and apologies. I was hoping that my colleague Jennifer de France would be able to intervene to replace me because I was called to the AB on non-communicable diseases and air pollution. Apologies. I heard what Monica was saying at the end. I mean, we need to keep with science and making sure that the science will be, in any case, evolving. So we have to look for this very conclusive evidence. But in the meanwhile, as I was saying at the beginning, there is no reason why we cannot start as well on a macro frame on public health, saying that obviously we need to reduce plastic presence in our daily life, except for those circumstances and occasions for which they can be even life-saving in medical practices and others. But there is no point on recommending the use of plastic where they can be a replacement, and certainly nobody will disagree with the fact that we need to reduce massively pollution. and that is including as well plastic. So WHO will be moving into that approach, while we will keep with providing science on a specific impact of microplastic in water or microplastics in food, and what is the impact, while we propose this global approach on reducing pollution, because we know for sure that this is a non-regrets investment on the reduction of the plastic in our daily life, and reducing this pollution approach. Over. Thank you again, Miguel.
Thank you very much, Maria. I have now the honor to close the session, which could have lasted probably 1 year, not 1 year, 1 hour longer. I mean, it's a very timely issue. I come back to what Mr. Palanisamy has said. There's no better time to speak about plastic pollution. I also take into account what's been said, there's not enough evidence now. We have to work on the science, and we have to work how the science can inform the policy. Then also, that is a truly multi-stakeholder issue where everybody has a role to play, including manufacturers, but also the international organization. I'm coming from the health domain, and I know that we in Geneva, we have a lot of representatives from ministries of health, but often to get good health outcomes, decisions need to be taken outside of the health domain. So we need to work together with different domains, including the environment ministries, the trade, industrial finance ministries. It has to be a much broader. This is a truly cross-dimensional issue and can only be solved with everybody taking a part of. What also has been mentioned is that we need to do better, and we need leadership. And I hope we can come out of this discussion being inspired by the input. We have a problem here, and we need to do better, and we need to go back on track to reach the goals. So this being said, it's been an honor to serve as a moderator. It was a big challenge. There's so much information, and I hope I served you well. I apologize to all the speakers I had to cut down, but I think everybody brought really insight into the panel. I just want to close by thanking Diana and her team from the Geneva Environmental Network for organizing this panel. I think it's very good that we can continue this discussion despite being at a distance. And we really hope, going back to Paul Rose, that in the coming meetings that we have on health, plastic health pollution meetings, we can meet back together again to advance this important agenda. So Diana, back to you.
Thank you, Miguel, and thank you to all our speakers, and of course to you who are still with us online. So we went behind time, as we do in all these sessions, because there is so much to say, but we hope we have given you, I mean, that you will look also further in what the organizations that have been involved in these sessions through what they have presented to you. Thank you all.